Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Ziad and today we will see together a Symfony component called Validator. Validation is a common task in web development. You can use it to validate data sent through a form, validate data sent to your API before inserting data to database, etc. In our case, we are going to validate data sent through a post API request. Say that we have this endpoint over here that will allow us to create cats, and then it takes all those informations of a cat as input, and then it will return for us the JSON presentation of a cat itself. So basically it will return us all these attributes that we have already sent. So if I create a cat over here, it will return me the same input that I have sent. But say for example here that I will send -3 as age, which is not an acceptable value. So we are going to validate that. We are going to validate that through the validator component and return an error instead of accepting that. So I'm having an error here, and the error is saying this value should be positive. We are going to add some other validations, like for example the name should not be empty, the breed the same, and the color should be only some accepted values such as white, black, gray, and then the weight, it should be a positive value. So let's see how we can achieve that with the validator component. So let's get started by creating the project, and we will do that by composer, create project, Symfony skeleton. We'll give it the version 6.3 and then the project name, which is validator in our case. Let's hit enter and let composer do the rest. And then we are going to open our project with our IDE. In our case, it's PHP store. We are going to need at least 2 components in order to achieve what we want to do in this small demo. The first one would be a dev package, which is Symfony Maker Bundle. It will help us to generate stuff like controller, commands, etc. In our case, we are going to use it to generate a controller for us. So composer require dev and Symfony Maker Bundle. And the second component would be Symfony Validator, the component that we are going to use to validate what we are going to send through API. So composer require Symfony Validator. Now we should be okay to get started. So let's go ahead. For now in our project, we don't have any route defined yet. If we do PHP bin console debug router, we will have a single route that is configured by Symfony, which is error, and that will display for us an error when we got something wrong in our code. So let's create a root and a controller. We will do that by the maker component that we have just installed by doing PHP bin console make controller. So the controller will be cat's controller, and then if we go to our src controller folder, we should see cat's controller here. And then if we re-execute again our command, which is php bin console debug router, another time we should be seeing another root added for us, which is /cats, which is defined here thanks to PHP 8 attributes. Sorry, it was not a good command. So debug router, and we should see, yeah, we have cats endpoint over here. Let's improve it a little bit and make the method takes only post. Because we are going to send a request, a post request to this endpoint to create a cat. Then the index would be named rather create cat. And then we will need the request over here. A Symfony component HTTP foundation request. And then we are going to use this request over here to map what we will be sending and create an entity, a cat entity, and return it as a JSON. So let's create the cat entity. To do so, we are going to src and create a new folder called entity. And then within, we are going to create a PHP class called cat. And this PHP class is going to have some attributes. which are name of type string, not nullable, breed of type string, not nullable as well, and age of type integer, but it's nullable, color of type string, and it's nullable also, and weight of type float and is nullable as well. Let's generate getters and setters of this entity. Getters and setters, I'm gonna select all of them, then I'm gonna use fluent setters. Like that, I'm going to have all the getters and setters of my 4 attributes, of my 5 attributes, sorry. Now let's get back to our controller. What we are going to do here is to create a new entity and then return this entity as a JSON format. So the code that will allow us to do that is the following. We are going to map the request to an array. Like that, we can access the attributes easily, then create a new instance of cat, and then we will be setting the name, what we are going to get as name from the post request, and the same goes for breed, age, color, and weight. So basically we are mapping the request that we are getting to the entity's attributes, and then finally we are returning the cat entity as a JSON format. But this won't work, because in order to have the entity serialized in a JSON format, we need to install a component called Symfony Serializer Pack. So we need to go to our project in command line and execute composer require Symfony Serializer Pack. Once this component is installed, we can test our small endpoint. So our component is successfully installed. So we can test our project, but before, let's run it, because otherwise we won't be able to test it at all. So to run our project, we just have to execute Symfony, which is Symfony CLI tool, Symfony server start, and we will have our project running with the port specified in the output over here. So it's running in localhost 8000 here, and I can use now my Postman, my tool for testing the API, to test whether I'm going to get a response if I send this JSON body over here to this endpoint with a post request. So let's test this. I'm sending the request, and yes, I'm getting a response. So our small API is working, and we can now do the validation, because for now we are doing nothing as a validation. If we go back to our code over here, we are simply mapping the request to an array and then creating an entity and setting the values with whatever the request is giving for us. Alright, so now we are going to go to the interesting part, where we will use the Symfony Validator component. If you haven't installed the component yet, go to the command line and just execute composer require Symfony Validator, and then you will be able to use this validator component in your Symfony project. So let's go to the cat entity over here, and let's impose some rules over the attributes here. For example, name, it's of type string, but we don't want it to be blank. So we are going to add an annotation over here saying that this value should not be blank. It's not an annotation, it's a PHP 8 attribute. So not blank, and it's a Symfony component validator constraints. So we are going to have the name not blank. The same will go for the breed as well, and for the age we want it to be a positive number, because you don't have in negative ages, so it's an integer of type, it should be positive, yes. The same goes for weight, and finally for the color, we want to have 3 colors. So we want to choose between 3 colors, and we can do that by giving the choice constraint, and it will have 3 possible options, which is white, black, and gray. So if you don't provide these values, we are going to have basically an error. That's basically it for the validation. We can go deep in details on validate a lot of stuffs. The full list of available constraints is available here in Symfony documentation, and we can have basic constraints, string constraints, comparison, numbers, dates, and all the other possible constraints. The exhaustive list is available here in Symfony documentation, and we can use it as a reference in order to see what constraint you are going to use in your project. So now we used basically three types of constraints: not blank, positive, and choice. In order for us to see these constraints in action, we simply have to inject a validator interface, the request, and Symfony will take the responsibility to inject for us a validator service. So validator interface, so you are going to need a validator interface. The variable will be called validator simply, and then the violation that we are going to have, violations equals validator validate, and we will pass to it the cat entity. So here we will be having all the violations, and we are simply we're going to do this if count of violations is more than 0, meaning that we will have violations of our entity. We are going to return the violations as a JSON. So this JSON, the violations. All right, let's test our API. So say that we are going to create a cat with name cat of bead Scottish fold, and the age is 3, but the color is blue and weight is 1.3. The color here is not allowed because we don't allow blue, we allow only gray, white, and black. So let's send this and see how our API will react. And we are getting an error of basically saying that the value selected is not a valid choice, and the valid choices are white, black, and gray. So yes, our validation is working. We can go ahead, for example, and set the age -3, and you should see an error saying that we still have the color error here, and we also have the age. The value should be positive, and if we, for example, don't give the name a value, we should also see another error here. So we have 3 violations for age, name, and color, and so on and so forth. So our validation is working as expected, and we are good. I'm guessing that that's it for this component. As usual, I'll be posting some questions to allow you to refresh your memory and see if you have retained something in this small video, and see you in videos to come. Bye bye.